to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. We have a fascinating show, a show actually that I first discussed with the scientists who published a study back in August, I want to say. Maybe it was October. I forget now. It's been a while. He was reluctant to do the interview until he had a lot of good information out there, because it's too easy for something like this to be turned into BS, a hack or some other nonsense, which is common in this day and age in the health and fitness world. He felt he had a responsibility to make sure that the information that he was talking about was well seated in good evidence. And you have to respect somebody like that in this day and age where people read an abstract and invest millions of dollars into making supplements without really understanding the research or even proving that it's legitimate. Before we get started, we have to thank our titled sponsor, and that is Legendary Foods. You know, Legendary Food makes snacks. We all love snacks. Let's be honest. But we don't really want sugar. And we definitely want high protein, because protein leveraging does a body good. Legendary Foods has come out with the sweet rolls, a line of buns, let's say sweet buns. Really, if you were somebody who would always want to eat a Cinnabon, but you won't because it's just sugar and dough and garbage, you can now enjoy the cinnamon flavored sweet roll. They also come in chocolate and wild berry. 1 gram of sugar, 20 grams of high quality dairy protein, 5 net carbs if you're a low carb guy like me. They allow you to stay in your lane and feel like you're cheating, but you're not, because they're delicious. Not only are they delicious, but they're better than a protein bar ever was. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10 to save 10% off, and let them know that you learned about them here on Superhuman Radio. Amazing product, and I promise you will love it. And without further delay, let me get my guest here. Welcome to the show, Dr. Marc Hamilton. How are you?
I'm fine, Carl. Thank you.
So, first of all, let's discuss metabolism, metabolic rate. Metabolic rate and metabolism have been misunderstood and misdirected. People think that if you eat a lot of small, frequent meals, somehow that increases your metabolism. What it does increase is the ability of the GI to move food through the body faster. But I don't think it's ever had the ability to increase metabolic rate. When we talk about metabolic rate, we talk about the number of calories or the amount of energy it takes for your body at rest. And then, of course, when you add exercise back into it. Talk about metabolism and metabolic rate for a second.
All right. So when we talk about metabolism, that's a very broad word. There's metabolism of different fuels. And so you can think of, there's carbohydrate metabolism. And then within that, there's several types of carbohydrates. One of them being blood glucose, another being intracellular glycogen that's stored in the liver or in muscles, and so on. And then there's fat metabolism, which there's different types of fat based upon where it's stored in the body and whether it's circulating in the blood and in what form it's circulating in the blood. And so most people, though, when they say metabolism, what do they mean about how many calories do we need in a given amount of time? And so metabolic rate is using, mostly it's either carbohydrate or fat for fuel, and that's going to be dictated by several processes. One of them you mentioned that is misunderstood, as you pointed out, which is how eating changes our metabolic rate. And eating can change which type of fuel we're using. Eat a lot of fat chronically, you're going to have to burn more fat. If you eat a lot of carbohydrate, you're going to have to use more carbohydrate. But the actual metabolic rate, it only increased a small amount after eating. And that's called the thermic effect of eating. It's typically about 10% of the total calories that we burn every day. And most researchers just keep that as a constant. It varies a little bit, but not that much. And then they're interested in what chronically ate one type of macronutrient fat, for example, versus another, what effect that would have. We could talk about that if you're interested. But the variable that's really under our control in terms of metabolic rate is not what we eat. It's not from supplements, and there's no drugs that legitimately can increase metabolic rate. The one thing that's under everybody's control, it's the metabolic rate of skeletal muscle. And so muscles at rest, and this is the most important fundamental point that all your listeners can pick up on today. If this is all they got, then I'm okay. Is that muscle has a very low metabolic rate when it's not working. And that makes sense. It's a very well-built machine, and it's not going to waste its valuable calories throughout the day when it's not being used. And that number has been well measured in both humans and in animal studies. It's not a controversial number, and we know exactly what it is. How many calories per kilogram of tissue and muscle tissue do we use? And is it different between old or younger people and so on? What is the effect of acute exercise and then the recovery period afterwards on it? So all those numbers are nailed down. And the bottom line is that skeletal muscle uses relatively little energy when it's not working compared to when it is working. And as a muscle physiologist, it's remarkable to me that more people aren't aware of this, but that muscle can increase its metabolic rate as much as 100-fold above resting. So those muscle fibers that are recruited to work, not all muscle fibers are activated during every exercise, of course, but of the fibers that are activated, their ATP demand, their energy use, and therefore the amount of carbohydrate or fat, depending on what kind of exercise it is going to increase profoundly, 100-fold. No other tissue can probably say that. Muscle will use much more energy, even per gram, than the beating heart. And so the heart's a pretty efficient little contractile machine. And so that's a fundamental point. And when I say fundamental, what I mean is that once you know that, then it helps you understand where things are either misperceived or where you might be going down a productive trail of research to find solutions to improve human health.
So I know a lot of people talk about resting metabolic rate, which you can ascertain using a bomb calorimeter and other devices. Now they even have little portable app-driven devices for your cell phones. And then there's the non-exercise energy expenditure. And obviously what you're talking about is the activity or energy expenditure of muscle. Both of them combined, all of these combined really make up your daily energy requirement. And if you eat more than your body uses day in and day out, that surplus usually turns into body fat. But the thing that is most fascinating is that you decided to study a phenomenon that I don't think anyone was paying attention. I mean, we could all agree that, getting up and walking for an hour in the morning, going to the gym and exercising provide a value, but they're pretty much blunted when you then sit down at a desk for the next 8 hours a day. What made you interested in the soleus muscle specifically as a possible influence on elevating metabolic rate?
Right. Okay. Yeah, you actually on a couple good questions within that question. So I've been doing biomedical research since the 1980s, and it was it was no secret, even when I began, before I was around, that different muscles have a different phenotype. Essentially, what that means is that the different muscles have different properties based upon how they're naturally used. The soleus in all animals that it's been studied, generally the four-legged type of mammals, as well as in humans, the soleus is unique. And so it's the best example of what we call slow twitch oxidative muscle. Some people call it red muscle versus white muscle. So that's the endurance muscle. And it makes a lot of sense because whether you're a cat and you're standing up for an hour at a time maybe to eat, and then you lay back down and sleep the rest of the day, or whether you're a human who might have had to be an explorer or a farmer or something where you were manually up on your feet moving around all day, you don't want those important behaviors to be short-circuited because a muscle is fatiguing. And the soleus muscle is by far activated, meaning that the motor neurons recruit that muscle to work. And soleus is by far activated more than the other muscle for that postural type of support. And that includes walking. The soleus is critically important for walking. And so we knew sort of that about the soleus. We also have known for now 150 years that just anatomically, the soleus looks different than other muscles and has different contractile properties. And so very nice studies were done, in Civil War era. Folks were able to literally compare different animal species. And what was remarkable to me, and I don't know why this hasn't been picked up upon in recent years, but that it's curious to me that even an animal like a cat or a domesticated rabbit has a soleus muscle. It's 100% slow twitch oxidative muscle fibers. And when you stimulate those muscles electrically to work, they're very fatigue resistant, or at least they can be based upon how the muscle's working. And so we take that and we fast forward to our current age, and human beings are obviously not required to be very active throughout the day for most jobs. And we sort of view now physical activity as a leisure time pursuit, or have a job that is manual labor. You probably are going to take it easy in the evening and make up for that activity in the day and just compensate by sitting more in the evening. And so I've always been, since the mid 1990s, early 1990s, when I was a postdoctoral fellow, had finished my educational training, but was trying to decide what I would do independently for the rest of my career. I was fascinated by the fact that some muscles in the body can contract for hours per day, and they have a totally different metabolic response than other muscles. Well, high intensity action. Back to the rabbit example, we know that cats are great sprinters. They can run much faster than even a human. But that's because of the type of muscle that they're predominantly have in their legs, which is this wide, fast twitch muscle. And in most researchers that look at human muscle, they kind of, we're aware of this, but then they ignore it, and they like to say things like, well, in humans, we have a more homogeneous type muscles, meaning that our thigh muscles, like the vastus lateralis, are, more a mixture of muscle type. And while that's true, it sort of assumes that all activity is the same for health. That whatever exercise you want to do, it doesn't matter what you're doing, and do it all. And I would say that that's not a very physiological approach. And so when we began our research a long time ago, the idea is we wanted to understand what was happening, especially during the prolonged contractile activity of the slow oxidative muscle, mostly in animal studies. And
we know even in humans that long distance runners, cross country runners versus sprinters, the longer they train at their chosen style of running and sport, that the muscle fibers do acquiesce and change appropriately. to fast twitch or slower twitch muscles, given the type of running they do. Isn't that correct? I mean, can't muscle fibers change, or perhaps they don't individually change, but they predominate with a more appropriate muscle fiber given the type of training that you do?
Sure, there's adaptations, for example. We would say that training can change the quality of the muscle. It's not just how big the muscles are, right? And we all know that. And like you said, endurance training will tend to make muscle fibers become more oxidative in their metabolism. But it's a question of degree. And so let me give you a real quick example. What I'm thinking of here is that it goes back to your first question as well, is that back in the 25, 30 years ago when I began this, one of the research models that had been very insightful, it's not used much anymore, but at the time we were able to go and do surgical experiments, and we could do this mostly in rodents, and we could implant inside the animal artificial stimulators that would stimulate the motor neurons to different muscles. And because it was under our control, we could make a muscle work 24 hours a day, even though it was in the leg. It wasn't in the heart or the diaphragm. And when we did that, we would see enormous adaptive changes in those muscles. Mm-hmm. But again, that was kind of discarded because people would say, what's the practical relevance? Because that's a surgical technique. And it's maybe insightful to understand molecular biology, but it's not insightful for how to live a life. I didn't give up on that question. I just simply said, is it possible that we can learn from taking a physiological perspective, how to isolate a muscle contraction so that we get these other muscles out of the way that do fatigue, and they won't adapt enough to be completely fatigue resistant. Maybe the human soleus has preserved, despite the fact that we're sedentary these days, maybe the soleus still has a genetic programming that's good enough that we can learn to do the right type of movement in the right muscle, and we wouldn't have to use a surgical technique. Instead, we can make the soleus work all day long. Now, we thought there was a little pie in the sky, so it literally took us over a decade of research, first in animals, and then we did it in humans, to what's the right way to work the soleus muscles so it can be fatigue resistant, even in elderly people or people who don't like doing other kinds of exercise. And we also didn't want it to interfere with our other exercise habits. If I like weightlifting, you do too. And I also like endurance training. And I guarantee you, I don't want to do something that's going to interfere with that training. Mm-hmm. But I also am saying I want more, meaning that I'm limited in how much time I can exercise in the gym. Even if I did 2 or 3 hours a day in the gym, that's still, I'm going to be awake 16 hours. So it's leaving a lot of time on the table for really no healthy from a metabolic or muscular or cardiovascular standpoint, no healthy time there. And so we said, we'll just take advantage of some of the time that we're already having to sit anyhow. And can we target the soleus in the right way? And this is the next big point that I really want to make. And I don't want to, because it's probably going to come up later in the conversation. So I want to introduce it now, is that not all types of soleus contractions or not all types of muscle contractions are equivalent. And you know that from the specificity principle of different ways of exercise training. But for some reason, the clinical type of exercise researchers neglect this. And they just talk about movement in general, like, it's all in the same box. And I would say that we can, for example, show that the soleus muscle can rely heavily on muscle glycogen during some exercise, and it will fatigue quickly. Whereas when we do the soleus push-up, we were surprised pleasantly to find by taking invasive muscle biopsies that it's not relying on glycogen, despite the fact, and this is the big take-home point here, despite the fact that when we do the soleus push-up correctly, that oxygen consumption or metabolic rate of the soleus is extremely intense. Let me state that again, is that the metabolic rate of the soleus during the soleus push-up is intense. It's higher than you would have with walking or running. And now it's granted, it's a small muscle mass, it's 1% of the body weight, but in that muscle that's working, it's not a light stimulus at all. It feels like it's a light stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why people oftentimes misperceive it as fidgeting or non-exercise.
Nervous energy, right?
Nervous energy. Those things, that's right. Those things don't demand near as much energy as we're talking about. And it's certainly not targeting a specific muscle. And so we've done other types of soleus contractions in animals and in humans that don't require as much energy and therefore don't have the same health benefits as the soleus push-up.
You know what's really interesting? I like to race motorcycles. I used to like to race cars, and so I can always see similarities in human body and cars. And so the gastrocnemius is very close to the soleus muscle. It's a very different muscle.
They're touching each other.
Right. And so I was just thinking, back in the old days when we had coil springs and shock absorbers, the coil spring bore the burden of the weight of the car all the time without fatiguing. But the shock absorber was like a fast twitch muscle because it had to dampen the overextension of the spring. And so it got involved and then it got out. It got involved and it got out. But the spring was like the soleus. It was doing all the heavy lifting, so to speak. And the gastroc allows for the explosive movements that you can't do forever and ever. And the soleus probably enables the gastroc to even work in the first place.
Yeah, that's a great analogy in a lot of ways. I mean, let me just say one thing about that, though. Here's where humans differ from every other mammal that has a soleus, is that the human soleus is larger than the gastrocnemius. And other animals, the four-legged kind, if you look at, for example, the lab rat, the gastrocnemius is 10 times bigger, 1,000% bigger than the soleus. And that holds up in cats and even in primates. The soleus is relatively small still. It's a little bit bigger. They climb trees a little differently. They don't walk that well and stuff like that. But humans have this massive soleus relative to our gastrocnemius. And so the soleus, we oftentimes will say, it's only 1% of body weight. It's a kilogram, right? But that's not insignificant. If the human soleus had only been the size equivalent to what we see in the four-legged mammals, the soleus push-up wouldn't work. So we're fortunate that nature has dealt us a good hand of cards. The soleus is a kilogram. We didn't know when we began the human work whether that was big enough. That goes back again to your question, why haven't people tried this? Why we didn't try it the first 15 years of my career, because we said the soleus is too small, it's unlikely to have whole body effects and so on. And so we didn't give up on the question of studying the soleus, but what we learned first through our animal work and then later in humans was that if we can activate the soleus intensely enough, and we can make it, like using your car analogy, if we can make it a fuel hog instead of a Prius that uses very little energy when contracting, we wanted to make it the gas guzzling Corvette. And so we said, once we figured that out, then we knew that even untrained people could sustain a very high metabolic rate of the soleus without fatigue. That opened the door, because then we said, what might it be having for whole body health effects? Because now we can double the metabolic rate of people just from working the soleus. So let me just real quickly, because it goes back to your first question about what is metabolism. I want to make sure everybody understands this, is that normally the entire muscle mass of the body of a muscular person is only accounting for about 25% of total metabolic rate. A person like yourself who might be more muscular than average, that's great. If you have less muscle, it's going to be less. It might be 20% or 15%. But what we're saying is that's still small relative to the mass of that tissue. Probably half of your body is muscle if you're muscular. And so if you take the soleus, which is 1% of your body weight, and you're not using any of those other muscles while you're sitting at a completely relaxed position, we've shown that even in untrained people who aren't athletic, they can literally double their entire body's metabolic rate.
That's amazing.
And so what that means is that if I took all of their muscles and added up the metabolic rate, that would be 25% of the total. The soleus is now fourfold greater than all the other muscles combined that are at rest. And you and I don't have to be convinced. You've studied the literature to know that muscle metabolism is unique. It's very healthy. You want to have a high muscle metabolism. And this is something that people could instantly, today, without having to train up to do it, start to benefit. Now, I'm not suggesting they can't get better to optimize that with practice, but on the first day of our research studies, we're able to get our research subjects to be able to double their metabolic rate just by doing the Soleus push-up. And they can sustain it for hours, not minutes. And so now it comes down to the question of what does that change, physiologically in the rest of the body. And there's a lot of fun questions to go after.
And we're going to talk about what is the Soleus push-up on the other side of the break.
Sure.
But before we do that, to set the stage, so when I train calves, I train calves in a standing position where my knee is locked, my leg is straight, and I want to affect the gastrocnemius muscle more. But I'm under the impression that when you train your calves in a seated, where you have a 90-degree bend, the knee is broken into a bend, you're focusing on the soleus muscle. Is that true?
That's right. That's right. And and folks who do weight training are familiar with the idea of a seated calf raise, where you put a heavy load on the leg, and you're going to recruit the gastrocnemius much less when you do that. The reason for that is that the gastrocnemius is a two-joint muscle, meaning that it crosses not only the ankle joint, but also the knee joint. So when you bend the knee, you're essentially putting the gastrocnemius on slack. And so it's a floppy muscle. And the body just naturally won't activate it as intensely, knowing that it's a floppy muscle. And people have gone in and studied this, and they've even looked at the energetics of it, and it all kind of comes out as you would expect, that the gastrocnemius is activated better when you do the straight leg like you do when you try to hypertrophy it. The soleus is a single joint muscle, meaning it doesn't cross the knee. And so origin is on the bones of the top of the tibia and the fibula. And so as it's then goes all the way down to the Achilles tendon, like the gastrocnemius, and it's just tugging on that tendon. And so the soleus, therefore, doesn't matter whether your knee is bent or not. It's going to cause the ankle to bend. And the other thing about the soleus is that I mentioned before, it's a bigger muscle. And that's because it has muscle fibers going all the way down into that Achilles tendon, whereas the gastrocnemius stops about halfway down the calf. Not even halfway, about a third of the way down the calf.
Yeah, right. Is the soleus responsible for explosively high ability to jump? It's like a loaded. It stretches and loads, and then it springs. Is that the soleus, or is that the gastroc as well?
Well, they both contribute.
Okay.
And using okay, so going back to your car analogy. The reason I like that before, I haven't heard that before, but it's when you invoked a spring, and here's a beautiful thing that happens naturally when we walk. We don't have to think about this, but when you walk, as soon as the foot hits the ground, you start to activate the soleus muscle and the gastrocnemius. But what happens is that during most of the time that your foot's on the ground, you're actually stretching the soleus, meaning that it's not a shortening contraction. And what you're doing is that the body's trying to hold the soleus in a relatively constant length. And so what you're doing is you're starting to stretch out that connective tissue, especially in that big Achilles tendon. So then at the last part of the step, when your heel starts to rise, the body naturally turns off the soleus. So there's no electrical activity in it, and that spring action occurs. So the soleus is a powerful, forceful muscle, but it's all passive when you're walking. Right. It's beautiful. And so the soleus is conserving energy when you walk, because it's working in an isometric contraction, which takes less energy. And then at the very end, when the muscle's doing that plantar flexion, that's when it's off. So it's taking no energy and it's actually recoiling. So it's taking the energy caused by that elastic stretch. And the gastrocnemius is doing a similar thing, but the gastrocnemius is a different fiber type. It's a little bit more fast twitch. And so if you're doing a very rapid movement, the gastrocnemius is perhaps more powerful per gram of muscle than the soleus. But remember, the soleus is bigger.
We're going to take a break and we're going to discuss what the Soleus push-up is all about. But you're also going to want to visit two websites. You're going to want to visit soleusmetabolism.org, which is Dr. Marc Hamilton's website, and also his YouTube channel, which is at Marc, M-A-R-C, Hamilton, Ph.D., so that you can do more research after this show. Because there's lots of clarifications that need to be made, as you can see. And believe me, there is going to be a variety of hucksters that are going to start to try to use this and tell you that it's this new hack that they came up with when you use their supplement in conjunction with it. Beware, it's coming. That's why Dr. Hamilton was so cautious to even do the podcast. We had to wait for him to get everything in place first, so the idiots out there wouldn't spoil it. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Stay tuned. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio, and we'll answer all your questions. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. Great sleep upgrades you on virtually every level: body fat, muscle mass, mood, brain function, and countless other ways. But taking melatonin alone isn't the answer. Thanks to a brand new sleep formula developed by my friends at Bioptimizers, you can experience the best night's sleep ever. Sleep Breakthrough is a delicious sleep drink that supports your natural melatonin production and relaxation without creating a dependency, so you can have the best night's sleep on demand. It targets 5 different sleep pathways to give you the best sleep ever. And best of all, you'll wake up feeling rested and rejuvenated so that you can have the best day possible. For an exclusive offer for my listeners, go to sleepbreakthrough.com/SHR and use the code SHR10 for 10% off. Plus, you can unlock special gifts with the value of at least $20. This is a limited time offer, so go to sleepbreakthrough.com/SHR right now.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
Move over, superheroes. This is the Superhuman Channel.
Welcome back. You know, there's something all of a sudden there's a bunch of dog foods coming out, and a couple of them are calling themselves keto dog food. And Ron Penna, when he was at the helm of Quest Nutrition before they sold it for $1 billion, he had funded the Keto Pet Sanctuary in Texas, where they took dogs that were preparing to be euthanized, who had cancers and tumors, and they had everything you could imagine the finest hospitals have. and they kept these dogs alive. Some of them were then found new homes because they didn't die in a month or a year, like the vet said, because they put them on a keto dog food. And that dog food became their pet food that we advertise on this show, which is Visionary Pet Food. The story behind Visionary Pet Food is profound. It's not just the dog food that a bunch of people got together and said, hey, kibble is bad, which it is bad. We know that. We've done shows about kibble. But this is the food that saved dogs from being euthanized that had active cancers. And don't be fooled by all these companies coming out and saying that they have a special Farmer Joe's dog food. I post on every one of those Instagram posts, what is the carb content of 100 grams of your food? Most of these foods are 40 to 50% carbohydrates, and these give the dogs the same metabolic diseases that their humans have. So if you want to try a dog food for your dog that they will love and that will keep them healthy and they age better so they live longer, you have to try Visionary Pet Food. That's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, back to the subject at hand. So can you describe what a Soleus push-up is and how we could perform them sitting at our desk?
Sure. And you mentioned before the break, one of the efforts that we've recently begun is to provide the public with some sort of educational materials. There are hundreds of doctors all over the world who have been making videos about how to do it and why to do it and how much to do Soleus push-ups and so on. And that's great that there's a lot of enthusiasm. And so what we do to try to describe that, what I'll do today is sort of summarize in words the best we can. But it's like you described before. You sit all the time, and so this is what you would do when you're ordinarily sitting. You don't sit more because of this. You don't take time out of the day. It's not an either or type proposition. You don't either do Soleus push-ups or some other kind of exercise. You do your other exercises, and this is what you do in the part of the day when you're not doing it. And so it's sitting. And we do that in part because it's great that we do so much sitting. It doesn't matter how much you exercise. You've got ample time. You know, the average human nowadays, you can put wearable devices on people, and that the average human is sitting about 9 or 10 hours a day. And we've even looked, when you look at the distribution though, I mean, that we see that the least active sitters are sitting about 2.5 hours a day less than the average person. So they're still sitting 8 hours a day.
Well, yeah, that's not significant.
Yeah, it's not a big deal to me. And so what we would say then is everybody has ample time to improve their health if they want to do what we're talking about to try to raise muscle metabolism throughout some of those other hours. So the actual biomechanics of the movement, though, are like you described. The knee is bent, and we have in both our research papers as well as in the little video for the public and these doctors who are trying to teach their patients, we explained that it's you bend it to the point that ideally, if you want to do it optimally, and you don't have to do it optimally, you can start with whatever's comfortable for you, but that you would have the ball of your foot pretty much below your knee. So don't put your feet way out in front of you.
Right. I'm doing it right now. I just figured it out.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, here's a little experiment you can do, or anybody can do it on themselves. If you put your foot substantially in front of you and try to lift, you're going to fatigue. What happens is now you're starting to use that gastrocnemius too much. It's not that you don't use the gastrocnemius at all when you're doing the Soleus push-up. You just tone it down to the point that it's not going to fatigue. When I put my foot more in front of me, and you make that angle so that instead of an angle like this, okay,
right, which is under 90 degrees,
right here. Now what happens is that gastrocnemius is more engaged, and you can feel it start to fatigue, and some people it even cramps.
Well, it's even harder because in order to do this properly, the normal position of the foot has to almost be heel up, heel off the floor. That has to be like the neutral, so that what you're doing is just bouncing on the ball of your foot and your toes, and it's very natural. It once you get it started, it just keeps going on its own. If I move my foot all the way forward, Now, all of a sudden, it's a lot more work because I have to really use my gastroc to get the heel off the floor in the first place.
Right.
And I can feel it. I can feel my gastroc ball up like it's contracted.
Right. Well, the one thing about this though is that remember we don't want that spring effect, that's that bouncing. So when we talked before about walking, that tendon in the calf is really good tendon for being a spring. If remember, we're not trying to be energy efficient when we're doing the Soleus push-up. Like with walking or running, I want to make it inefficient.
Yeah, I walked it out. I walked it out a little bit from where I had it actually under my body and my seat.
There you go.
Now I just walked it out a little bit, and now I have to use the Soleus to work.
You got it. That's right.
Yeah.
And people have different flexibility, so the exact position is a little different. And so, but you've got to then when your heel's coming up in this position, if you're doing it the right way, the beauty of it is that the soleus is active metabolically all the way to the top. Remember, I described before with walking, we're made to be very efficient. So when you're doing that plantar flexion phase of walking toward the end of your stride, when the heel's coming up, the soleus is completely off. So it's taking no energy actively. It's all passive energy. It's that spring. But when we're doing the Soleus push-up, it's all active energy, meaning that as the heel's coming up, it's only going up because the Soleus is making it go up.
Right.
When you get to the top, well, then you're not going to fall. Meaning if you completely relax the muscle, your brain is saying it's okay. You're not going to hurt yourself. Let it come down. Whereas when you're standing or when you're walking, you do have to still load that muscle actively to come down a little bit because you want to ease it down, right? You don't want to hurt yourself. And so it's probably possible that some guy could train himself to sit there with a heavy weight on his leg and go up.
I was going to ask you about resistance, right?
Yeah, and then he's probably going to lower it slowly, that eccentric phase. It's going to take a little bit of energy, but that's a different situation. The Soleus push-up, we want to be active coming up and passive coming down. We're trying to make it an energy inefficient muscle, which is the exact opposite of all the other researchers that look at muscle metabolism. I don't want to be energy efficient when I'm sitting. I want this muscle to be burning fuel. And that's part of the science that we've developed here is that, again, we learned how to sort of flip nature upside down in the sense that we got a very good machine. As you use the car analogy, we've got a great engine in this machine, but we want that engine to be resistant enough to work all day long. We don't want it to break down like some race cars might, right? And so the soleus is got a strong tendon. It's working with a joint called the ankle, which we don't have as much problems with aging as we do our knees, our backs, our shoulders, and so on. This, unless you step in a hole or twist an ankle stepping off a curb, the ankle joint is pretty good at bearing a lot of work throughout the day. And when you're doing the Soleus push-up, you're not lifting that much weight. You're lifting the weight of your legs. That's on the average person, it's about 25% of your body weight. So it's, there's some weight there. It's not completely unloaded, but it's not so much that we can't do it repetitively with high reps.
Well, so I slowed it down, right? Okay. When you're in the gym and you're just bouncing the weight, you're really not getting the tension that you need to stimulate protein synthesis. And so originally I was bouncing it, right? Boom, 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 boom. But now I slowed it down and I'm methodically pushing up and letting the heel fall, pushing up. And I'm sure that if I do it this way long enough, I'll be able to speed up the action.
Right.
But I kind of feel like this is actually, this feels like a little more like work.
Yes.
And that's what I want, right? I want it to feel like work a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little bit of work, but it's
not exhausting.
It goes back to your point that this is no hack. This is not a shortcut. We want to work the muscles. We just want to work them safely. I mean, I want an activity that I can do throughout my entire life. And I don't have to give up. And I'm not saying that we don't want to continue to exercise our whole life, but it doesn't matter whether you're a weightlifter or a runner or a tennis player. You're not going to physically perform as well when you're 80 and 90 or older than when you were a younger person.
But this you might.
That's right. And so what we would argue, and we actually have the data on that, Carl. We have data on people in their 90s, and that a lot of times they'll outperform a young athletic person. We've studied collegiate athletes doing this. We've studied 90-year-old plus people doing this. And the important point is that a lot of times as we get older and we have to cut back on these other activities, that doesn't mean that you still don't have discipline. It doesn't mean that you still don't have willpower. And for those people who have the desire to improve their physical health and mental health as much as they can through muscular activity, this is something that we can add into our lifestyle safely. And the beauty of it is the sky's the limit as to how much you want to do it. If you're elderly and you're sitting 10 or 12 hours a day, you want to do it 10 or 12 hours a day, do it. Go for it. It takes a little bit more discipline than if you did it 30 minutes a day. But I'm always surprised at when we start people out, we want them to start out slowly and incrementally. And I tell them just do 2 minutes every once in a while. They find that I've got to be sitting here anyhow. Right. And I'm no fool. And I might as well use my muscles. I've got them, turn them on, use them. They're in.
So let me ask a couple questions.
Yeah.
So theoretically, I go to the gym and I train for an hour and a half in the morning, right? I've got my metabolic rate elevated. It's depending on whose science you look at, how long it'll be elevated. Mm-hmm. And then I come and I sit for 8 to 10 hours and I negate a lot of the value of that training. If I do this for some portion of those 8 to 10 hours, I'm kind of not negating the metabolic adaptation changes that I want because I'm sitting, right?
You've got it. I mean, and I like the way you described it is that it's not an either or proposition. It's what you're getting in the gym, you can't get from doing Soleus push-ups, right? You're going to get stronger and bigger or whatever your goals are in the gym, or at least maintain what you've got, right? But that from a metabolic standpoint and a cardiovascular standpoint, that engine is now back down to resting levels quickly. And whether it's idling a little bit higher for a little bit of time after exercise or not, it's debatable. But I don't really care about that debate because what I would say is you're not coming close to doubling metabolic rate when you do that. You're talking 5% for a few hours. I would rather say, let's let the gym be the gym. Go in there and focus on what the gym alone can do for you. And then the rest of the day, let's focus on what Soleus push-ups can do for me that I can't get from the gym. And I can't even, again, as we get older and I'm pushing on 60, I want something that I'm guaranteed that I can do until my last day. Because I know that if I lay off even 6 months, things fall apart. And we all know that. I mean,
I love these people on YouTube. They're 30 years old and they're talking about anti-aging. Mm-hmm. And I once posted on Instagram, because I'm 65 now, so at least 5 years ago, I posted, don't take advice from anti-aging advice from anyone who hasn't reached 60 yet, because everything changes in the body when you hit 60. Yeah. It's amazing. But anyway, so what about if I go to the gym and I train for strength and hypertrophy? I train the soleus muscle and I make it bigger. Is there going to be an advanced effect to the metabolic increase?
I don't know. We haven't studied that. I would first say you don't have to do that because that's not what we've done in our studies, right? We've taken people who have, and we'll use MRI, which is an imaging technique where we can quantify the volume of the soleus. And we don't see that people with small soleus or big soleus seem to do better. But again, we haven't done a performance study with them. We just simply wanted to say, let's double your metabolic rate and let's hold that high metabolic rate for hours at a time and see what happens to your muscles. So we go in and we biopsy them, or we want to look at systemic health and cardiovascular responses. But I mean, if somebody has a bigger soleus, they probably are going to benefit a little bit more. I mean, I'm just using common sense here that you've got a little bit bigger engine to work with. Some people will also ask about, do you have any hypertrophy from it? And that's one of those things where what's your starting point and how much are you doing it and other things. And there's no doubt that the soleus is using a lot of fuel, but it doesn't need to get bigger to use that extra fuel. Those are biochemical processes. The bigger muscles that we get from lifting or other types of activity, that's that's putting down more myosin and actin, those big contractile proteins, and you're not really changing the metabolic profile of the muscle near as much as this high endurance activity would do. But it wouldn't hurt. I mean, for example, I do an enormous amount of strength training with my calves because I've gotten pretty resilient, and it's something I want to maintain. And so, but I don't think that's made me better at doing the Soleus push-up, but it also can't hurt, right? But I could do both, and that was my point. It's not either or, and I can do the hardest weight workout. The things that just shred young men, and I will sit down for the next 3 or 4 hours, and I can do Soleus push-ups fine.
And I'm gonna start doing them because I feel so guilty sitting at this desk for hours at a time.
Yeah.
And I do get up. I get up a couple times an hour at least and walk. And sometimes I go out for a walk after a show. But that's all good. I'm not going to give that up, but I'm just going to make sure that my Soleus muscles are active when I'm sitting at the desk. That's it.
That's right. It's right. It's a lot of the arguments that people have had against exercise, lack of time. Well, that excuse is now out the window, and people will still say to me, yeah, but I'm not going to do it every minute. I said, did I ever ask you to do it every minute? You said, I'm saying you get to choose.
But it's habit forming. Once you start, you want to do it more. And like I'm sitting here and I'm like, and I put my feet out and rest, and then I bring them back in and I feel like bouncing them again.
That's right.
So we have to take our last commercial. God, I'm sorry, Doc. We have to take our last commercial break. I have 2 other questions I want to ask you about. One is about jumping rope, and the other one is about how neuropathies may affect both the results and the ability, because we have an epidemic of neuropathy today. We've talked on this show about the lowest common denominators. We have a lot of different stratifications of population, and bodybuilders, weightlifters, people who drink coffee, and I've been trying to find why we have so much neuropathy in this population today. And it's fascinating. So let's do this. Let's take one last commercial break. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hey guys, it's time to change your f***ing underwear, and it's time to change to Sheath. Sheath's underwear's revolutionary designs allows your man parts to hang the way they would naturally hang if you were not wearing underwear. And this improves the blood flow throughout the day to the twigs and berries. If you've never experienced wearing a pair of Sheath underwear, boy, is there an exciting experience waiting for you. Grab a pen and write this down. Go to shrnetwork.biz/sheath. That's SHEATH. And use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 20% off your first pair. And get this, if you're not completely satisfied, send them back for a full refund. That's shrnetwork.biz/sheath.
BPC is one of the most amazing supplements you can use. It's been shown to increase the speed of recovery, heal the gut, and do so many other things. BPC stands for Body Protection Compound, and it's a naturally occurring peptide in the body. Used by professional athletes and weekend warriors alike, there has always been an obstacle in the way of average people using BPC, and that is it was injectable only. Not any longer, thanks to NutriNeeds. We now have oral BPC, and it works. Go to shrnetwork.biz/NutriNeeds, NutraNeeds. Use the code SHR and save 10% off your bottle of BPC. Feel better, recover faster, train harder. NutriNeeds. Hey, this is Carl Lenore. I am the inventor of GunLeash. Over 500,000 handguns are lost in the United States every year. If you carry a gun like I do, you are 300 times more likely to lose your gun. And 15% of those guns will end up in criminals' hands and used in the commission of a crime. GunLeash solves that problem. GunLeash is a patented, no-tracking proximity device the size of a postage stamp. It will alert you as soon as your gun is outside of your range, so you can never leave your gun behind. To learn more and to be notified when GunLeash is available at the end of January, go to gunleash.com and get on our mailing list. GunLeash. Never lose your gun, never leave your gun.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. Don't hate us because we feel good.
I laugh whenever I hear the gun leash. We thought we were going to launch in January. It's going to be August. Bringing this electronic device to market has been so challenging that I've been told by two very successful businessmen that it just means that fewer people will be able to follow us into this category. But we are launching in August. We've received our FCC certification for the device, and we're making some final changes to the app. And so if you're interested in this device to keep you, and we also have a second patent we just filed on an anti-theft device for cars, because 90% of all handguns are stolen from automobiles. And the problem is the gun safe community doesn't have an answer for it. We do. We've used our technology in the gun safe. And so my objective is to bring an end to lost and stolen guns in America, because it will have a direct effect on the homicide rate. And I will be able to say proudly when I die someday that I helped save lives. So that's my legacy that I'm working on. With that being said, let's get back to the topic at hand. What about jumping rope? Jumping rope has a semi-bent knee, so I would imagine it does activate the gastroc as well as the soleus, but that's got to be kind of like magic for this whole discussion.
Well, I think jumping rope, though, it's sort of on par with other exercises. We can't do it that much, and so I mean,
I can't do while you're sitting, obviously.
Yeah, so jump rope if you want, and then the rest of the day you've got the option to continue to work those muscles by doing a Soleus push-up. You know, it's all of those exercises that we choose to do, and everybody's got their routine that they believe in. And some people also are very serious about their nutrition. This isn't an either-or proposition, folks. The point that I'm trying to make just physiologically, and whether somebody wants to do a Soleus push-up or not, they at least have to agree to the following fact, is that muscle metabolism is low when you're sitting at rest. That's it. And so all these other exercises we do are great when you're doing them, but we can't do them all day. In fact, you would overdo it if you did too much. And we're just saying we worked to try to develop a way that for people who choose to continue to benefit from muscle metabolism, to do that for hours per day, not minutes. And that's important. And so it's we don't have enemies, so to speak, with folks who want to rant and rave about different nutritional or pharmaceutical tricks. Fine, you believe in whatever you want to believe in, but none of those things will raise muscle metabolism for hours. And there's been some research where people have tried to do that with brown fat, the kind of fat that wild animals have, and humans have a little bit, but not as much as the wild animals. But there's not a pharmaceutical approach to that.
There's no approach. Look, I did some of my earliest interviews about brown fat, right? We always look at rodents because they develop brown fat easily. Mm-hmm. If humans develop brown fat, it's usually in the haunches, right in the middle of the trapezius muscle. It looks like a mound. It's not aesthetically pleasing looking. And I remember there was this guy, I can't think of his name now. He had everybody taking ice baths so that they would develop brown fat. And I said, why? When we know how to build muscle fiber, like why would we go to, what's the value of having fat that burns calories when you can build biceps and traps and a back and legs, and that will do the same thing? And we can do it, and it's easy to measure, and you don't have to do something stupid like sit in an ice bath every day for an hour. I mean, let's be generous and say that it's the field is not developed to the point to where it's nearly physiologically effective enough for me to sit in the ice baths. And again, if the evidence was there that I could double my metabolic rate all day long, well, then good for them. But it's not there. It's the proof's in the pudding there. It's not to say that research shouldn't be done on it. Is it ready for prime time is the question. The research fails when you look at the Inuit. That's all I'm going to say. When you look at the Inuit, they don't have a higher amount of brown fat than other people. Right. So, and they live in very, very cold climates.
Right.
And so they should have the most brown fat. They should have an even layer subcutaneous brown fat throughout the whole body. They don't have it.
Well, and here's one way to think about it: is let's say that somebody is gone out and spent $5,000 to get one of those cold water tanks that they put in their living room, and they live somewhere where it's really cold, and they go out and they do that, or they're taking some pharmaceutical and they believe it's working. Okay, fine. Let's say you're doing that. If you really believe that that's going to be good for your health in the long run, then you should be trying to raise muscle metabolism too. Because I would say that why not? I mean, again, right now, my metabolic rate, your metabolic rate is twice of a lot of the listeners who are skeptical. And that's fine. But it means that if they just got out of their cold bath, they're probably, as soon as they warm back up, they're back to where they started. And so they're not shivering anymore. And much of those effects really aren't brown fat. It's just shivering. It's muscle working. And when you take out the shivering, the metabolic rate comes way down. And so that's fine. Do it. I mean, I'm not arguing against it.
But do your Soleus push-ups while you're warming up.
Yeah,
that's all.
Yeah, it's not an either-or proposition, folks. Is that you can benefit from raising muscle metabolism, and I dare say that now the question really can be, a lot of folks will say, can you do too much of something? You know, they love these quips. Too much of anything is bad, and I would say, well, certainly if there's an adverse response to the treatment, then you can have too much of it. But fortunately, in our research, and we didn't know this until we did the studies, that people weren't going to be getting muscle cramps, or they weren't going to be fatiguing, or wasn't going to interfere with their other exercise. Your heart rate doesn't increase because, and I won't go deep into this, but that this is well-known cardiovascular physiology, and we've done these studies, is that the body has two ways of increasing the blood flow from the heart. And the heart rate can go up, or something called stroke volume, which is simply how much blood is pumped out each beat.
Right.
And this physiology goes back, many, many decades, which is, it's known that when you go from rest to light activity, heart rate won't go up, but that the stroke volume goes up. And then the heart rate starts to contribute more and more, to the point that stroke volume just plateaus out. The beauty of what we're doing now is we're doing it primarily through raising stroke volume, not heart rate. So there's not this sympathetic nervous system stress on the body like if I were exercising. And so we don't have to worry about overdoing it. So there is some evidence. It's not strong evidence, I would say, from experiments, but some evidence that if you do too much aerobic exercise, especially at certain ages, and men more than women, you might have a little bit of adverse cardiovascular responses.
Yeah, idiopathic AFib, or idiopathic mitral valve prolapse. Yeah,
right. And we know that there's overtraining in athletes when there's certain hormonal changes and so on. But what we're doing now, this is not causing an increase in my cortisol, my testosterone levels aren't dipping. Because
it actually feels good. It actually it feels like I'm getting ready to go. I don't know why it feels that way, but that's what it feels like.
That's right. And it's what's interesting is somebody who's young and healthy maybe won't feel that to the same degree as a person who has some pathology. Again, one of the advantages of the modern era, as much as you alluded to this before, folks like myself are very conservative. I'm a scientist. My job is not to promote public health. And a lot of people have said to me, why don't you go and talk on podcasts and do other things? And I say, it's not my job. I do the discoveries and I leave it to be. Mm-hmm. The only reason we came out to start talking about this is because there were hundreds of doctors all over the world teaching their patients, and they're putting up YouTube videos and other things. And some of these are getting millions of views. I mean, there have been over 100 million views out there on YouTube and these other forms of social media. And so our attitude was we should at least let these folks sort of serve as Trojan horses for us and report what we did scientifically accurately. That's all we're asking.
Right.
And so going back to your point is that if we can teach people how to do this right, then it can have a lot of public health gains. And we would love to see that happen. But I get some responses now that we've started this website, a little newsletter where people can write into our lab and comment. we found that a number of people have had responses that we haven't studied before. So I have to be careful. Is this anecdotal? Is this replicated?
Sorry about that. This thing goes on its own.
Okay. And that you mentioned you feel better. What we see is more so in elderly than in the youthful people, but not always. Some of you mentioned before, some of the younger people who have a lot of spent up energy in high school, college, more males than females, but not always. That they're told by their teachers, sit still, don't move, this kind of stuff.
Right.
And we kind of know, and a lot of these mental health issues that deal with lack of physical activity, they feel better. But with the elderly people, they describe to us more cardiovascular type of responses. And so we have 2 grants in to the NIH right now to look at elderly people who have certain disorders that sometimes limit their ability to exercise, but more importantly, they need exercise far more than the average person. Okay, so it's a conundrum. You need it more, yet you can do it less, and you do it less because of balance problems, because of orthopedic problems, and so on. But they need it more, and everybody who's elderly, who is physically active, will tell you that. You lay off for 6 weeks, you feel it more. Yeah. And so what we're trying to say is that here's something you can begin at any age, you can benefit from for different reasons. It's not all about metabolism. That's what we've talked about so far. But when we say metabolism, like you said before, it's a broad word. There's a lot behind that. We haven't talked about inflammation today. We haven't talked about cardiovascular responses today, and so on. And so, but we all need to have a behavior that we can sustain 365 days out of the year, even when you're busy, even when you're injured, and especially as we enter that last, 2-3 decades of life where we have to start scaling down our other activities. I don't want to become less active just because my joints won't let me. Right. I want to find something that I can continue to do, and I'm going to be good at it. I don't want to just feel like I'm kind of knocking around a little bit. And so this is something that the elderly people can compete with any young person. It's fun to watch. Some of these people who have cardiovascular diseases and they have trouble exercising, they have a very low capacity for it.
Right.
They do this fine because, again, the heart rate doesn't go up.
So here's my last question. We now, is my microphone sound okay? No.
Yeah, sounds good.
Test. There it goes. We know now that all of the neuropathy out there, while there are different reasons why it's happening to people, are driven by lack of blood flow to small fiber of nerves. So it's actually called small fiber neuropathy. And it's like when you were a kid, you sat down on your leg and watched a movie for 2 hours. You stood up, the leg was asleep, and then it goes through these phases where it tingles and it hurts and it's numb, and then feeling starts to come back. And so when people have neuropathy, they're kind of like in between the leg waking back up and the leg first falling asleep. And so you just said something. The companies that are advertising on Instagram and all these other companies, they're selling people TENS units. And what's a TENS unit? We people know that, you attach it, it pulses an electrical shock, and it causes the muscle to contract rapidly over and over again. And they're finding that when you do this to the muscle, you're stimulating blood flow because the muscle is demanding blood. The nerves start to come back. I wonder if this would work for people who have this type of restricted blood flow neuropathy, because you're demanding the lower legs is where they get it mostly, and the lower leg is what you're using to do the push-ups.
Yeah. So we've used electrical stimulators. I mentioned before, I spent 10 years of my life as a professor of veterinary medicine. And so I could do a lot of surgical procedures and so on. And that's how we began my lab's work. But the artificial stimulators that you put on top of the skin are nothing like what I described at the beginning of this podcast.
Right.
Okay?
The one
much weaker.
Yeah.
And secondly, the type of contraction we're talking about with the soleus is, like I said before, it's driving the blood flow and the metabolic demands more than you would have with walking and running.
Right.
So it's a very intense type of metabolic and cardiovascular stimulus for that muscle. And because it's you don't have to tie yourself into a unit that then and you're saying, I've got to turn this thing on, I've got to wear it all the time, and then I'm not going to get the same benefit. I don't really see that as being a major replacement for those push-ups. You could use it as an adjunct if you want to, but again, like you said before, I'm sitting here doing this as we're talking. It's not hard for me to do, and so you're right. Neuropathies is a big problem, right? And it's underreported because so many people just chalk it up to old age.
Right.
And it's so prevalent. It's sort of like peripheral artery disease. You just chalk it up to old age, but it's a pathology that's quite serious.
Right.
And one of the biggies of that is you're right that there's probably multiple causes, but one thing we do know is that as many as 25 to 65% of people with peripheral neuropathy also have prediabetes, which is probably the most grossly underestimated metabolic condition there is, because the kind of prediabetes that's most dangerous is not found by taking a fasting blood glucose in your annual physical exam. It's found by ingesting 75-gram glucose load and waiting 2 or 3 hours.
But not only that, the idea, and I agree, the challenge test is important because it shows the response.
Right.
But the idea that we still check blood sugar levels without checking insulin levels to see how hard the pancreas is working in order to maintain that normal blood sugar that the doctor's going, oh, you're fine. If the pancreas is working 90% duty cycle to keep your blood sugar in the 70s and 80s, you're gonna hit the wall eventually. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, you're right. That and it's so in our for example, that research study that we can give a link to that too if you want for your readers. It's free. We made it publicly accessible. People can read it for themselves, especially read the introduction and discussion of that, because it's written in language that I think most people can get. If they have trouble with it, that's why we created this website, and we'll walk people through it, so to speak, and they can understand it. And we've got other studies coming out. So with this, let's go back and talk about the prediabetes just a little bit and the glucose and insulin. In that study, what we did was we took people who had prediabetes, so meaning that they're at risk for neuropathy or they already have it. And then we said, can we bring down the glucose and the insulin by doing Soleus push-ups? And in that particular study, we explicitly said we want to test the acute effects, meaning before they get the adaptations of doing the Soleus push-up. So we said, we're going to test it after just 1 day. So we gave them a 75-gram glucose load, and then we measured glucose and insulin throughout that 3 hours, every 15 minutes.
Right.
And then what we showed was that, blood glucose, as soon as it started to rise, within 30 minutes, it starts to rise. We saw that the Soleus push-up already had blunted that rise statistically significant amount. And then throughout the entire 180-minute test, it was able to keep not only the glucose level lower, but also the insulin level lower.
Yeah,
and so it's very effective at keeping that pancreas from having to work overtime because of insulin resistance. And then we've done chronic studies as well. We can talk about later. But the point to all that is that you're right that neuropathy is a problem. And a large part of neuropathy is failure to manage your blood glucose levels well. And we can't run from the fact that these things are largely under our control as we age. And, we oftentimes want to say it's just aging or whatever. This is solid evidence that I don't think anybody would argue with the data but that it comes down to the question of, and we don't know the answer to this. I honestly don't. How many people are going to take up this behavior voluntarily to improve their health? It's such an unusual thing in that the lack of time and the physical limitations and other barriers aren't there with Soleus push-ups. So the word willpower is almost become a dirty word
I know.
in science, and I don't quite understand that because it's motivating for people to say, I want to do something to help myself. If you have mental health or physical health problems that can be improved by muscle metabolism, let's take advantage of what's naturally in our body and use it. And if you need other type of supplemental help, you need to change your nutrition, you need medications, fine. But don't neglect what's already in your body that's there to help you.
Right.
You don't have to worry about the side effects, and you don't have to worry about more research being done on it. And so it's people are tripping over themselves to short circuit what's already there in your body to help you.
I agree. And I am telling my audience to commit now to start doing Soleus push-ups whenever you're sitting. I'm assuming you don't annoy somebody or your wife goes, stop doing that, you're distracting me, but you can do them at your desk. No one sees them. None of us, all of us have enough room under our desk between our knees and the desk where I've been doing them, but I've been doing them rapidly. And I'm wondering when I look at this video later, if I was bouncing much. But go to soleusmetabolism.org or to the YouTube channel at Marc, M-A-R-C, Hamilton, Ph.D., and learn how to do them the right way and start doing them. This is simple stuff. I love this. I'm like excited now. I'm serious. I'm excited about like, where else can I do these? What about unilateral? I'm in my car. Can I bounce my left leg?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You can work one leg at a time. And again, sometimes that, like you mentioned in a car, but there's some chairs that just aren't good for doing this, right? And some sofas, and so one leg is a practical way to do it, and you don't have, just like with other exercises we do, it's not all or none. You can scale it down so that you don't have to. If you say, "Oh, I don't want to do it because I'm in a meeting with my banker today," well, then don't do it. Then you're still going to.
I would do it, and I would tell my banker why I do it, and I'd say you should do it too. That's how I operate.
And Carl, one of the fun things that we've seen happening, and this has been a global thing. So you picture all the cultures throughout the world. Somebody could go on and Google Soleus push-up and Soleus metabolism, and you'll see that there, like I said, there are tens of thousands of stories out there. And so what's happened is we see these different third world countries. We see countries with very different cultures from the Middle East versus in Japan, in Spain, in the United States. And it's fun that you get a lot of these are talking about what you just said, which is you got entire families now who are doing this together. Maybe the younger people in the family heard about it from somebody like yourself, and then they're starting to teach their parents. And so 10, 15 years from now, culture will change in many ways. We don't know how it's going to change, but it will change. Not all of us used a cell phone 15 years ago. And so probably what will happen is there will be a lot of early adopters now in the next, few months. We've seen that over the last 9 months. And those people can start to benefit immediately. Like I told you, the first day you do it, you'll benefit. And then you can continue. And there will be other people who say, you know what, everybody else is doing this, just like the cell phones. I was one of the last people on earth to get a cell phone because I didn't want it. My kids said, Dad, you got to get it. You're missing out on what's happening in life. We need to call you. And so I eventually got it. And now everybody has a cell phone. It doesn't matter where you live. You can be in a third world country and you got a cell phone.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is with this, there will be people, if they're not ready for it, that's fine. I'm not trying to bend anybody's arm. You don't want to do it, don't do it. I'm just telling people that the physiology is what drove what we're doing. And the goal was never to change human lifestyles in some grandiose way. But there's a level of enthusiasm that we've simply never seen before with other types of physical activity. Remember, this is not a glamorous thing to be talking about.
Right.
I mean, if I were sitting here showing you my abs, everybody would get motivated. I want to have rock solid abs when I'm 60 or more. But this isn't about that. We're not trying to give anybody a quick fix. In fact, we're doing the opposite. It's interesting that a couple of these YouTubers have challenged it as a quick fix or a hack. And I've said, how do you say that spending 5 hours a day doing muscular activity is a quick fix? I do 35 hours a week.
It's
And
I'm so tired of this category. It's ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
why I long to get out of it because
Yeah.
of that. It's a
Well-
quick fix. It's a hack. It's just silly. It's a long-term commitment is what it is. You're gonna have to do this throughout the day for months and years to see the benefits of it. But at least you have something you can do while you're sitting.
That's right. And again, if you want to, if people want to start with saying, I'm going to make a goal to be committed to doing Soleus push-ups only when I watch my favorite program on TV for 30 minutes, and maybe 6 months or a year from now, they might want to do more. That's fine. You'll benefit from those 30 minutes compared to if you were sitting inactive. Your metabolic rate will be higher. You'll have better blood flow. You won't benefit as much as if you didn't do more, but that's okay. At least you're starting to learn the habit. Your neuromuscular system is improving. You're getting more skilled at it. You don't have to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour at any activity. I mean, if I brought somebody into the gym and said, let's run on the treadmill, I doubt seriously their first day out, I'm going to have them running intervals.
Right.
And so it's like, fine, take it easy at first if you want. The difference with this, though, is its safety factor is much higher than you would have with other activities. And a lot of our people will be doing research studies, and we'll ask them, I want you to start out really slow and then gradually build up. And they oftentimes will just jump right up to a high level because they say, look, I'm going to be sitting anyhow. Why can't I go ahead? And I said, fine.
Yeah, that's how I look at it. That's how I look at it. Yeah. I'm going to be sitting anyway. Look, I have to thank you for taking time to come on the show so that it came from your lips to their ears about this. It's very exciting. I am saying I'm enthusiastic about this is an understatement. It is going to become a regular part of my day moving forward. And why not? It fits. It keeps me in my lane. It fits my lifestyle. It's perfect. I love it. I love it. Thank you very, very much, Dr.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Carl.
All right, take care. And everybody else. So, I've been doing less and less shows because I've been so busy, but we have a show tomorrow and a show Thursday, and you're not going to believe who's going to be here Thursday. Brooks Kubik just took, he did 2 world records in Olympic lifting. And guess what? Remember last time we had him on the show, he was a vegan. Well, he's a carnivore for the past year. And we're going to talk about his dietary changes. We're going to talk about his competing. And he even moved out of Louisville, Kentucky to Washington State. So we'll have him on Thursday. You're going to want to tune in. Then I haven't had Brooks on the show in a while. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Hamilton. Share this show. You never know whose life you're going to change if you share this show. Take care.